Welcome to the Everyday Discipleship podcast. Today I have with us Mr. Forrest White. Forrest is a well-known friend at First Lakeland here, and I'm really excited to talk to you today all about your missions and your mission ministries. Forrest is the Director of Missions Ministries here at the First United Methodist Church in Lakeland, and to get to know more about you and hear some awesome stories and talk about everyday discipleship from your lens. So thank you so much for being here with us today on the podcast. I want to first start off by asking you to share with us a little bit about you and how you came to find First Lakeland.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to be here and appreciate the chance to talk about calling and everyday discipleship. So I came to First Lakeland after having served for 20 years in the Virginia Conference, first at the local church level, but also some on the district level and then the conference level. I was actually an interim director of Missions Ministries at a Baptist church when in December of 2017, Pam Carter, who was the person in this role before I came, she messaged me on Facebook one night and said she was getting ready to move to another role and wanted to recommend me for the position. Pam and I had known each other through preparing for disaster recovery training that we did together in Georgia. And I said, sure. So one thing led to another, and here I am today. I had a lot of experience in missions dating back to my time in student ministry. A lot of people at first might not know that I have 23 years of experience in student ministry. And when I was in that area of ministry, I built the ministry around missions and service. We did the other things that youth ministries do, the fun stuff, the worship, student-led worship, Bible study, trips, the fun trips and whatnot. But we were centered around serving. At sometimes we would have 65 to 70 local service opportunities a year and as many as 6 short-term mission trips. So out of that, I just sort of evolved into mission roles with adults and students and some disaster recovery roles in Virginia Conference, as well as I was volunteers and mission coordinator for the Virginia Conference for 5 years. So that's a little bit about my church background that got me here First. So, but it's been a great 4 years for me so far, and I always tell people they ask how I think I'm doing or whatnot, and I always say, well, you have to ask the consumer. You know, I'm the supplier, but hopefully it's been good for the people who are here at First, and Staff Parish hadn't let me go yet. So unless you're here to tell me something that I need to know, so. But yeah, that's a bit about my church history. Going back farther than that, I grew up in the Methodist church in a small town. Went to a Methodist college. I feel like I was always called to ministry, but sort of ran from it, as many people do. I was teaching high school, Sunday school when I was a college student. I was a newspaper reporter for 10 years, and while I did that, I was working as a volunteer youth leader, and that call was always there, and finally, I guess I gave in, and my life has been enriched because of it. I told people who've asked me before about leaving the newspaper business. I said, my job then was to tell other people's stories, and I wanted to write my own story and make my own story instead of telling everybody else's. So that's my church background. So.
I think one of the things that we hear a lot about in church, but we don't necessarily all have the opportunity to see, is this conversation about the worldwide Methodist Church or the global Methodist Church, in that it's not just First Lakeland here on Sundays, or even the Florida Conference, or even in the whole United States, United Methodist Conference. We have churches all across the world and unique missions. So can you talk a little bit about the impact of mission work within the life of our church?
Sure. What I always tell people is that healthy mission begins in our daily living and goes outward from there. Some people think, Jesus said that we're called to be witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Some people hear that wrong and think missions has to be crossing a body of water, crossing a border to truly be missions. And some people would say, well, why do we have to go there when there's plenty of work to be done here? The answer to that, I think, is in Jesus' call there. Did not say to be witnesses in Jerusalem or Judea or Samaria or the ends of the earth. It's an and proposition. So we are engaged in ministry around the world. We have partnerships with Zoe Ministries, which empowers orphans around the world. We're specifically sending, or we have members who are part of a team going to Kenya this year, or in just a couple of weeks or a week or so to go and serve there. We have a sister church in Camagüey, Cuba. We have a ministry presence in Haiti, which is difficult for us to go to now because of all the turmoil in Haiti. We have missionaries that we support in Costa Rica, Japan. We have had a relationship with a church that we helped to build in Bulgaria. So we do answer the call to international missions. But again, healthy serving for the individual and for the church starts in the daily living. It's not just, things that we plan with all of our ministry partners, but looking for chances each day that are always placed before us to serve. And that's where, we really become servants, is when, that's becomes our DNA. We are just tuned in for whatever the opportunities might look like. I mean, sometimes people ask me the difference between volunteering and serving. Well, volunteering is something that is usually placed on your schedule when there's nothing else there, and it's usually done when it's convenient. Serving is a matter of the heart. It's looking for reasons to say yes, whether it be something as simple as someone who's struggling to carry a heavy load, literally or figuratively, that we encounter today, or again, just saying yes to needs that come up, and just looking for reasons to be involved and to help. And I think that when we do that, we show that people are valued. God's message to us through the life, death, and resurrection of Christ is that each of us is irreplaceable and each of us is invaluable. The world's message is you're easily replaced, and someone else can do what you do, probably even better. So you're easily replaced. But that's not God's message, and we need to be about living so that people understand that we are trying to share God's love, to help them see that they are of value in our eyes, but more importantly in God's eyes. The heart of serving is to show people that they are of value, that most importantly they are of value in God's eyes, but also as disciples of Christ, they are of value in our eyes and should be of value in everyone's eyes. The world's message is clear to individuals. You are not that important, and you are easily replaced. I can go out and find someone else who can do what you do, and maybe someone who can do it even better. But in the life and death and resurrection of Christ, God's message is clear that each of us is invaluable and each of us is irreplaceable. And that's how we should go about our everyday encounters. And that's truly what each of us is called to do as disciples of Christ.
So how does that thought process that each of us is irreplaceable, how does that inform mission decisions? So if the church is deciding we want to do this many mission trips this year, we have the funds to do these types of trips, how do you make that decision in terms of where we're going to go, what kind of work we're going to do there in those places?
Sure. Really, to answer that question, I should say that First has a really great just process in place to decide who gets financial support from the church. It's called our Outreach Funding Committee, and they meet in the summertime a couple of times, and they assign each member 2 to 3 of our ministry partners, and those individual committee members go out and they will interview people involved in the ministry, the leadership, and they'll ask for, some financial documentation of how money is used and how the ministry is structured. And then they'll come back and have a big discussion about what level of commitment we give them, for the coming year. Now, tying back to your specific question, I'm a big believer that if we're supporting something financially, we should be supporting it with our hands and our feet and our human resources as well. Mm-hmm. So what I was really working toward before the pandemic was that whole idea of how can we get First members out and connect them with the partners. And we're moving back in that direction. One great example is we've been supporting the Dream Center of Lakeland for a few years now. Now we're a part of their Engage Lakeland ministry, where we have actually gone into a neighborhood off Brunel Parkway and just started building relationships. Anytime you go and do something like that, you've got to go with the mindset of mutuality. We are not going into that neighborhood thinking we only have something to give. We're going in there knowing that we have something to receive as well. And while we might go in there hoping and praying that God will speak through us, we need to go in there believing that God will speak to us as well. I mean, so many of the short-term mission experiences and just day-to-day mission experiences that I've had in my life, you go and you think, why you're going, it turns out that God had something totally different in his plans. Or that maybe the whole reason we were sent was so that we could hear something, or we could hear God speak to us in a certain way. So that's one example of a new sort of ministry that's growing here at First.
One question that I wanted to ask you is if you could tell us about a favorite trip, or maybe a recent trip or something, or a moment that just kind of stuck with you, if you would share something like that with us.
I think it's an illustration for me of how God works when we are intentional about serving. So in April of 2006, I was still in student ministry back in Virginia. I was driving my son Austin to baseball practice on the west end of town. I got a call from the church on my little flip phone back in those days. Suncom, I think it was. It was pre-Verizon. But it was a church calling, and they were calling to tell me that Mary Elizabeth Brooks, a former youth, had gone to MCV Hospital in downtown Richmond and been diagnosed with leukemia. Mary Elizabeth had been just a key component of that youth ministry when I went up there in 1998. She did everything that a youth could do in a youth ministry role. I mean, anything that this church would have for youth or any church would have, she was at the heart of it. And she had stayed connected with us through her time at Virginia Commonwealth University, and even as an adult leader on some short-term missions as she began her career as a teacher in the school system there in Richmond. But over the course of the summer of 2006, it became apparent that the doctors had caught her leukemia at too far of an advanced stage. There was really nothing they could do. Couldn't even stabilize her to get her on the bone marrow registry for potential transplant that could have saved her life. So in late August of 2006, the doctors had that awful conversation with Mary Elizabeth and her parents that she only had a little bit of time left. So the Brooks family was spending all their time at Mary Elizabeth's bedside, as any of us would do. So I just offered to cut their grass. Mm-hmm. And there cannot be any more simple an act of service than cutting someone's grass. I mean, you start the mower, you push it around, that's pretty much it. So on September 11th of 2006, picked up my son from school and we went over there. I got out their lawnmower, they let their yard go, as any of us would with a terminally ill child. And I just cut their grass. And while I was cutting their grass, God spoke to me. I don't know how many times God has spoken to me and I didn't hear it, but clearly God spoke that day and said, build a Habitat for Humanity house in memory of Mary Elizabeth, or for Mary Elizabeth. I think it was just more of that. So when you believe that God's spoken to you like that, you don't keep it to yourself. So I finished the grass, went home, took a shower, and went straight to MCV, talked to her parents, Herb and Joanne, told them what I believe God had put on my heart, and they thought it was a great idea. So later that night, in a private moment, they shared with Mary Elizabeth what we were going to do. 36 hours later, in the early morning hours of September 13th of 2006, I got another call. I knew the number calling me at that hour would be them calling to tell me that her body had died, and that's what it was. But we went on to raise $65,000, and we built a Habitat for Humanity house in her memory. We tithed for a house overseas, and I used that as a story to illustrate. If nothing had come of that other than me cutting the grass, it would have shown them that they were valued and that, someone cared enough to take care of something that was important to them while they were dealing with something much more important. But when we're intentional about doing small things, they might not always be small. Sometimes God will reveal something much bigger to us. So that was a real, just huge moment in my life, a moment that undeniably God spoke to me. And like I said, sometimes I wonder how many times God has spoken and I somehow missed it. But that was a time that I did not miss it. And that was a time where I didn't need to do anything but just go a few streets over from where I lived in Richmond to serve. There was no great travel distance or passports and 15-passenger vans. It was just drive over there, get out the lawnmower, and go to work. So
that kind of ties into my last question for you in thinking about those everyday little things. What does everyday discipleship mean to you?
I'm just a big believer in, trying to live out your life. Thomas Merton said that our job is to love people without inquiring about whether or not they are worthy. One of the great things about being a disciple of Christ, but working specifically in the area of missions and service, is I've never once knocked on somebody's door that had been, of a house that had been damaged by a storm, or gone to someone who was hungry and needed to be fed, or someone who was in prison and needed to be ministered to, and said, what's your sexuality? What's your race? What's your this or that? Because none of those things matter. That's a human. That's a child of God. They may not fully acknowledge it or fully realize it, but that's who they are. And in seeking to live out that daily calling, again, I just think that it's so important to keep your eyes open for chances to serve, but live in such a way. I just sent my son 27th birthday. He turns 27. I have two daughters as well. I've only mentioned my son, but I love all my kids. And I just sent him, he turns 27 on Sunday, in a note, and just said, I believe in you, I value you, I'm proud of you. And I believe that's what we should do, or try to do, with all the people we encounter, to show them that we value them, and that, as I said earlier, that more importantly, God values them, and each of them has something to offer us, and we may have something to offer them as well. One thing that I always try to tell people here is that we're in a season of Pentecost, at least when this is being filmed, and because of the indwelling power of the Holy Spirit, the person who's sitting on the back row of the sanctuary is as capable of changing the world as the people who get in the pulpit. The church, I think, does itself a real disservice when it sets up the ordained ministers or the church staff as the people who have more capabilities or more direct lines with God. People will ask me to pray with them or for them, and I'm always happy to do that, but I kind of always offer a disclaimer that just because I'm on staff of a church doesn't mean my prayers are going to rise above the ceiling any more effectively or more quickly than theirs do. So what we need to help all the people at First and anywhere else understand is, God will work through you. God is with you. God is already at work ahead of you. You don't have to have, I believe Dr. King said, all you need is a heart full of love and grace and whatnot to go out and truly change the world. One of my favorite authors, Tim Dearborn, has written a lot about short-term missions, and he says, it's not the church that has a mission in the world, but it's the God of mission who has a church in the world. So we just need to keep that in mind. God is going to work through us and in our lives and through our lives when we let God take that proper place. And we believe that, that work will happen because of that indwelling power of the Holy Spirit.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. How can folks get involved with the ministry opportunities that you're providing?
Well, we now have a system in place where we have some event registrations online. I am always here as a resource to help them, and I often tell people, if we're not doing something and you feel called to do something, maybe God's moving you to start a ministry of your own, and other people would join you in that. So we have lots of ministry partners, as I said before. I can connect them with them. Sometimes we'll organize groups to go out and serve locally. We have relationships like that with Noah's Ark, which is a ministry partner, and Society of St. Andrew, where we go out and glean. I was out gleaning corn yesterday. I was moving food today for Visti. So there's all kinds of opportunities out there. We're trying to do a good job of publicizing them, but they can always, shoot me an email, give me a call, and I'll try to point them in the right direction.
Well, thank you so much, Forrest. I appreciate your time and for sharing with us today, and for your perspective. I think that, just like you said, it is wonderful that we have these global partners like Zoe's Ministries and our partners in Haiti, and certainly those ministries are extremely important in the life of our church, but it's also the little things, and just like cutting your neighbor's grass. What are those little things you can do every day to be in service to others? You don't have to have a plane ticket. You don't have to go across the world. If you can, that's amazing, but that's not what you have to do. So I really appreciate that perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you so much. Thank you.